Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Balance video conversations where, as a church here at Kerith Community Church, we are in the middle of the series called Balance, where each week on Sundays across all of our sites, we are exploring two different concepts each week. So these might be theological practices or ways in which we outwork our faith, Christian traditions, and we are exploring the impact of them both, that often they seem quite opposing. And today we are talking about social justice and evangelism. And I'm joined today by Leon Johnson. Mate, you okay?
Yeah, good.
You're good?
Yeah, good.
Leon is our Windsor site pastor, and big news is it's your birthday today, Leon. So
It's
happy
my birthday, yeah.
Little bit of a round of applause for Leon on your birthday.
Thank you, thank you.
We aren't going to say how old you are.
No.
No.
No, we're not
for,
gonna
for
be
your
saying
for your benefit. But what we thought would be fun is if you're watching this, why not have a guess as to how old Leon is and put it in the comments below? We'd love to see. So we'll have a look back in a couple of months. Yeah, we'll be generous to him. Be kind. But put it in the comments and we'll find out what it is. I'll email you the answers. So for your birthday treat, you just recorded the message on evangelism and social justice. Second birthday treat is that you get to chat with me about social justice and evangelism. But thank you for coming by. So we're going to talk about these two concepts today. And you've preached this in Windsor as well, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Great, and I know, I think it's the Isle of Wight also having this message as well, recorded by Ellie. So if you haven't watched the message yet, you can watch it here online on our YouTube channel. So why not pause this video and go and watch that first? You can check out on the Windsor podcast as well as the Isle of Wight podcast for Ellie's message on this as well. Do you want to kick us off really by, I guess, tell us a little bit about the message? So what do we mean by this term evangelism? Because there's lots of connotations that can come from that word, right? What do we mean by it, and what do we mean by social justice, I guess, particularly in a church context?
Yeah, in a church context, I guess when we talk about evangelism, we're thinking about personal, sharing our faith, sharing the gospel, telling people about Christ, encouraging people to have faith, encouraging people into putting their trust and their hope in Christ and what He done on the cross. Yeah. It can be sort of like personal evangelism, just through what we do, meeting people in our communities at work. It can be through preaching and teaching. So I guess when we're talking about evangelism, I guess the emphasis is on the spiritual. Okay. Is the repentance of sin and putting their faith in what Christ done on the cross. So it's more for conversations and preaching.
So it's not necessarily about getting people into a church building. It's about telling people about Jesus so their lives are changed.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then social justice side of things. So what do we mean by that?
Yeah. So social justice in a church context is being more concerned about the physical needs of a person. So it could be something as simple as somebody who hasn't got enough food. We see that as an injustice, as a social injustice. We believe that God wanted everybody to have enough. To enough food, have not been food poverty, sort of like relational poverty, material poverty, even things like when we're talking about mental health, emotional health, anything we see that as not right, we see it as an injustice, the way that God didn't want it to be. So it's about being active in bringing about change. So it could be something, as simple as giving someone food who hasn't got food, or it could be something, more significant, more sort of societal, being a voice against societal structures that oppress people, that marginalise people. It could be being a voice in politics. All these different places that we can advocate for the most poor and the marginalised and the vulnerable in society. And it's just recognising that the church has a role to play in bringing about change in social injustice, whether that's at a community level, a national level, or even across the world.
Yeah. So I guess these two are two kind of ways in which we outwork our faith in terms of going beyond what God has maybe done in our lives, but the sort of meeting, serving others, right?
Yeah.
And am I right in saying there's almost like two needs that we're looking at here? There's the practical needs, but then you said about the spiritual needs. So spiritual needs is for the evangelism side of things, it's meeting those needs, and social justice is meeting the practical needs.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
So, so this series we've been looking at things like grace and truth, word and spirit, being countercultural and culturally relevant. And often these concepts that we're looking at can seem quite opposing, like almost like one ends of the spectrum more than another. Where do we? Why is that? Would that be the case maybe with evangelism and social justice? Like why is it challenging these two concepts together?
I think partly because they do emphasise different priorities, like you say, the spiritual and the physical. So because of that, they kind of pull on different resources in church life, and also it brings in different theologies. Like for example, when I first became a Christian, I remember I was kind of more exposed to what can be known as like a lifeboat theology, where I got this understanding in my first years of being a Christian that this world is basically headed for the cosmic dustbin.
Yeah.
And that we should focus all our time and our energies on personal salvation, so that people, like, once they die and leave this world that's headed for the cosmic dustbin, that they go and spend eternity in heaven. So for me, having that theology, it really influenced my practice.
Yeah, of course.
So I was like really engaged in personal evangelism. I used to go on the streets in Reading, and I guess it kind of made me a bit more indifferent to all the injustice in the world, to the poverty, because it was kind of like, okay, well, this world is there's not really much hope for it. So, let's just focus on making sure that people, once they leave this world, they're heading for heaven. Yeah. So it made me a bit passive and a bit indifferent to sort of like social injustice. But then as my theology changed and I come to a different understanding of perhaps what God was doing in sending Christ, and coming to an understanding that Christ was coming to bring the kingdom of heaven on the earth, and he was bringing justice with him, and that he was deeply interested in every aspect of our lives, whether it was kind of like our spiritual life, whether it was having enough to eat, whether it is having relationships, just, good emotional. I just come to understand that God bringing kingdom to earth was about kind of more of a holistic salvation, not just in terms of the spiritual, but the physical, the relational, everything. And I think, in our churches, we can have people that maybe have different theologies that might not be so exaggerated as that, but they just think, oh, we should be really emphasising on this because this is what's most important. So I think in a church context, I think sometimes they get separated because people have different theologies, different passions, and also because we have a certain amount of resources. Yeah. And people, some of us can feel, I think our resources and our time and energy should be more spent over here. I think that kind of brings that kind of separation a little bit in terms of where we focus our energies.
Yeah. So there's this feeling, almost maybe somebody who might be leaning really into the evangelism side of things, saying, what's the point? You're saying, like, what's the point in sorting out physical needs when this world is temporary anyway, and actually let's focus on eternity. And do you think the other end of the side of things, of the extreme, would say, I don't know, would it be more like, yes, we can talk to somebody about Jesus and let them know, but if they can't feed themselves, then, what's the point, kind of thing? Yeah. I guess you've got these extremes, haven't we? And, what you're saying about holistic there, the holistic nature of things, it's not saying that either one of those things are wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's, so, but actually we need both. So you sort of, do you think you see this as a false dichotomy then, trying to split the two of them?
I do, yeah, because I think, what we see in Christ is often he did meet a physical need before he got to the spiritual. And I feel it's often showing the love of God through, fighting injustice, through feeding the poor. It's often people get to see God's love and his grace before we bring our truth. And I feel that, that often it is being actively involved in bringing justice that opens so many doors to the spiritual conversations. So I think it is a false dichotomy, because I just feel Christ is just so interested in all of our lives, in every aspect. And ultimately, we a lot of the rest of it comes when we have that relationship with God restored. So I do kind of see, like, primarily I think, the motive behind a lot of what we do is that we hope that people will come into a personal relationship with Christ, and that their eternal destiny is secured. So that is the hope. But I think sometimes, unless we show the love of God to people through fighting injustice and through caring for people, that often those doors to those conversations are not really opened. And also, sort of public perception of the church, if we're just about, personal sin, calling to people to repentance, but we're not showing the love of God through our action.
Yeah, we can come across as kind of condemning of people, really, aren't we? It's like, it's, live this way, commit life to Christ, and that can come across as pretty, heavy-handed, all right? I imagine.
It can do, but then obviously we can lean too far the other way, where we just get so involved in caring for people's physical immediate needs, we can neglect the gospel. And sometimes that can be through we're concerned about the public's perception of us as a church.
Yeah.
Like, we just want us to be more palatable to the culture. So if we can almost, if we lean too far the other way, we can almost just be like another charity, really. And we can neglect the spiritual side and get into the root of so much stuff which causes the injustice. So there is a danger in leaning too far to the left or to the right, and I think we see that particularly in America, with certain churches in America, especially if we look at what's going on now, you've got sort of like the Republican churches getting the more kind of Protestant churches that would like to focus on personal sin and salvation, and would talk about personal morals and fighting against secularism. All that, we see that they're very pro-Republican. And then the progressive Christians that would talk a lot about social justice and bringing about societal and structural changes that leads to less oppression and less poverty. We see them on a democratic side. So we can see it, I think it's very exaggerated in America, but you can see it panning out how different churches lean too far one way or too far the other way. And I think the challenge is for us really to recognise the importance of both, and to hold that tension and to be active.
You're saying the word tension. Like, I've sat down and chat with Simon, and he talked about that phrase, a tension to manage rather than a problem to solve, when it comes to a lot of these concepts that we're looking at in balance. And actually, I remember when we were even looking at the title of this series, we were at one point thinking, maybe we should call it tension because that. But then we decided against it just because not all of them necessarily feel like that. But this one does feel a bit like that. Would you say? Like, feels like it is a tension to manage, because we want both. Like, for you, you're saying how you've moved from, like, you had a time when it was all about the evangelism.
Yeah.
How have you learned to manage that tension? Tell us a little bit about that journey of beginning to embrace social justice a bit, and what does that look like today?
Yeah, I guess it has changed a lot because my theology has changed. One of the things that we've been doing on a course that a few of us have been doing, one of the things that really resonated with me and grabbed hold of me is this concept of shalom, which was a Hebrew word that we get for peace. And I've just come to understand through the course that shalom means wholeness and completeness and well-being in every single aspect of our lives. And I come across a phrase where a guy called Noel Moles said that shalom is salvation properly understood. And it was this whole thing about holistic salvation. So I guess my emphasis went from, personal, spiritual, getting people to heaven, to actually, Jesus wants to bring shalom now, peace now, and wholeness now to our lives, until we have a measure of shalom in the world now. So I guess it now, when I'm sort of like trying to follow Christ's example, and I see that's where someone maybe isn't whole, where they are struggling financially, where they're maybe struggling with relational poverty, whether their mental health or their emotional health, I look at that, I think, no, this is kingdom work. This is what we should be doing, personally, to bring a measure of shalom to that person's life. So I guess I've come to see that, all these ministries we do in church are all kingdom work. And definitely sometimes I think, on a personal note, sometimes I think, oh, am I neglecting, sharing the gospel with somebody, or am I getting too far into the justice? And I think that's something that we just have to keep on coming back to God and being guided by the Spirit, really, and just thinking, okay, God, where are you guiding me to be active in this person's life? And sometimes sharing the gospel isn't that. You're not in that place with that person, and it is sort of like trying to help with a physical need that hopefully one day, if they see the love of God through you helping them, that it might open up them doors to those conversations. But I guess my perspective has changed in terms of like when I see a person now, I'm thinking about holistically. I'm like, okay, God, what are you calling me to do to help this person in which area of their life?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's it's fascinating, isn't it? I suppose you talked about the American church, and maybe what, certainly from our perspective that say are across the pond, what we observe in that. What would you say is like? What do you notice? I guess in the UK church world, positives and negatives. What it'd be interesting to sort of see.
Yeah. I think sometimes, we can be in danger of being very heavy on the social justice and just thinking, oh, come on, let's do the food banks, let's do the homeless shelters, let's do the stuff this community are going to think well of us, sort of thing. And I think some of that's good because we want to witness to the kingdom and to the love of God. Yeah. These are kind of like our prophetic practices, if you like, that we're showing people the love of God. But then sometimes I think, we can neglect being really bold in sharing the news that Christ came to die for people's sins, that there's no way to God other than through Christ. And sometimes it can be because we feel that, I wonder if, people are going to be upset or offended by this. Yeah. And I think the challenge in our nation, I think, is sometimes, we want to be bold in sharing our faith and the news of Christ as well. Good. But at the same time, like I said, we want people to see the love of God, to hear his grace before they hear his truth. And I think for us in Windsor, we've been in Windsor now for 6 years. And I think, it's been a good thing that we've probably been involved in lots of areas of social justice, because it is giving us a good reputation in the community, and people, I feel, our hearts are softening to us because they are seeing the love of God. So hopefully, as we continue to do that we'll also can continue to get more bolder in sharing our faith and sharing the gospel as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the message that we've heard about being countercultural and culturally relevant, and I wonder whether actually part of what it is to be culturally relevant at the minute is engaging in social justice, isn't it? Which has, like you're saying, it's good, it's good, but we don't want to sort of purely be doing that in order to just sort of win some brownie points with society in a way. I think what you're saying is really good there.
And it is something you're kind of mindful of, but at the same time, this is if we see in Jesus' ministry, he was about physical needs. He was about calling out societal and religious injustice. So we're just following that as disciples. We're following his example. So I guess just keeping the right motives.
You said there was a passage that you wanted to read from Jesus' life, is that right?
Yeah.
That helps us with this? Yeah,
I think this is where we see Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. He had just been in the desert for 40 days, 40 nights, and he comes out and he begins his ministry. And I read this passage. This is from Luke 4, verse 16. It says this: when he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, he went as usual to the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up and read the scripture. The scroll of Isaiah, the prophet, was handed to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where this was written. It says this: the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favour has come. So I just think in just that verse there, in verse 18, we see evangelism and social justice. We see him being about sharing the good news, but we also see him about proclaiming the captives will be released and the blind will see and the oppressed will be set free. And we see Jesus in his 3.5 year ministry was active in doing all those things.
Yeah.
He challenged people to put their faith in him.
That's really good.
And he also was about setting the captives free and releasing the prisoners as well. Prisoners from sin, prisoners that had wrong identity. And I think as disciples, basically, we're just carrying on the mission that Jesus started there. You know, and that's what we want our churches to be about carrying on the mission that Jesus done there. And Jesus was about evangelism and social justice. It wasn't either or, it was both and. So for us as churches, this is the challenge, that we need to be holding that tension and being about both and.
And would you say that's the case for churches as a whole, like in terms of the community itself as a church doing both, and as individuals within those communities doing both? Or do you think it's kind of like some individuals do the social justice stuff, some individuals do the evangelism stuff, and we'll hope it works out? What would you sort of say around that?
Well, I think this is where we need to be guided by the Spirit, because just in our context in Windsor, I think God has brought people there, and you just can see that they've got a burden for a certain area of social injustice. You know, they've got a burden for people that are in debt, or people that haven't got food, or for people that are homeless, and they turn up and you get in a conversation and you can just see, well, God's really placed this on your heart. So maybe this is a thing God's calling you to do. And then you've got people that come who've got real heart for evangelism, that really want to be involved in Alpha, that really want to, you know, that really want us to go on the streets and be preaching the gospel. So for me, I think it's a bit like, I'd use another football analogy, you know, like a striker. You know, his primary job is to score goals, but he's also got to get involved in other aspects of the game as well, because that's part of it. You know, the defending from the front, if you like. And I think for us as Christians, I think we've got to acknowledge that, we want to be involved in all of this, but God does call specific people for specific purposes. And I think it's just acknowledging that, oh, okay, God's called me to do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God's calling every other person to do or be as passionate about that as what I am. Because God's calling them to do different things as well. So I think people with the more of the passion and the burden for evangelism, that's great, but you've got to recognise that social justice is part of what God's calling us to do as well. And not everyone's going to be as passionate about evangelism as you are. And then people that are feeling, look, we need to get and help these people in the community that are struggling with mental health and stuff. That's great, and that is part of, you know, God's mission for us. But it's, you know, God's obviously speaking to you about that. So, but it might not be speaking to everyone about that. So I think that's where the tension happens, and sometimes in churches where people feel that everyone should be as passionate about the thing that God's placed on their heart as they are. But I think it's just recognising that as the church, as the body, that we're all going to get involved in different things, but supporting everyone else.
And I think sometimes as well, there feels like there can be a guilt sometimes. You know, I've been in situations where you've heard somebody get up to maybe speak or deliver some message about evangelism, and they're clearly so gifted at sharing Jesus with individuals, and you know they've got story after story of people that they've brought to Christ, and you know sharing on the streets and things, and you can go away from it on one level being inspired, but also if you're not careful feeling guilty because you're like, oh goodness, I haven't done that, or I haven't done this, you know. And probably the other end of the spectrum as well, when you see these people, they go, I don't know, you know, maybe they've sold everything they've had, and they've moved to, you know, I know my wife Heather, she's got some friends who literally they sold everything they had and are now living in the slums in Thailand to their doctors, so they, you know, to provide medical need to people in Thailand. And I come away from it being one, inspired, but if I'm not careful, again, guilty that I'm like, oh, it's not me. And I suppose, by appreciating that we're all different, like you're saying, can help us as a church, would you say?
And I think it's just each person just coming before God and say, okay, God, that's what you're calling me to do, and just making sure whatever it is that we're not shrinking back from it. And the reality is God's given, you know, put a burden on your heart, my heart, and everyone watching. And what is that? What is that burden that's bothering you? Some of the things that I think about a lot recently, which I believe is a justice issue, is there's a lot to do with the food industry. And like in chronic disease being related to food and what the food industry is putting on our food, ultra processed food. And I think I read a statistic the other week that in 1970, 6% of chronic diseases in America was related to food, and now it's like more like 60 to 70%.
Oh, wow.
And you just think, for me, that's a justice issue, because huge food corporation companies are making billions and billions at the same time as getting people sick, and that's my thing. That's something I've started to think about a lot, and thinking, okay, maybe God's calling me to be a voice in that, or to bring about change in that. I don't know what it might be, rather than just nagging my own kids about what they eat. It might be bigger than that,
Yeah.
But that's my thing. But I think but God will be speaking to you differently. He'll be speaking to the people watching differently about what he might be calling them to bring about change. To bring about, to be a voice in an area of social injustice.
That's great. So I guess I want to move on to, some of the challenges that churches face. So what would you say are some of the challenges that we face when trying to balance both kind of outreach, for the spiritual lives of people, of souls, as well as social justice initiatives? So what are those challenges? How can we overcome them? And then any thoughts on how do we stay balanced?
Yeah. I think it's a lot to do with people and resources. Yeah. I think for me, as a leader, when I'm speaking to people, like I said, I'm trying to discern, what's God calling them to do. Yeah. And I guess the hope is that in our churches, we're going to have people that are really passionate about evangelism, really passionate about different areas of social justice, and that they're going to get involved, and they're going to give their time and their energy and their resources to it. But the reality is that in some of our churches, we might not have those people yet. So it might be we are just going to be focusing on a certain area. And it's also to do with the resources and money as well. The reality is we'd love to get involved in so many different areas of social injustice in Windsor. Yeah. We see lots of areas of injustice where we think, we'd love to bring about change in that area, but we might not have the people, we might not have the money and the resources. So for me, it's praying and asking God just to give us the people, send us the people, and send us the resources so that we can bring about more change. And that, I think another thing we could do is collaborate with local authorities as well. Yeah. One of the things that I've loved in Windsor at the moment is we've got different groups meeting that not necessarily Kerith ministries, but they're using our building, and I would say that they're doing stuff that's just benefiting people holistically, whether it's a bereavement group. We've got a cocaine addiction anonymous group meeting one of our buildings. I was speaking to a couple of ladies the other day, want to use some of our office space to run a charity that helps with mental health. So I think it's collaborating with local authorities, local charities as well, to bring about justice. And then just, like I say, just praying that we get more resources, more people to have a bigger impact.
Yeah, really good.
And on the evangelism side, I guess, we run alpha courses. Yep. But we also, we want to be bold in sharing our faith and encouraging and challenging one another to take those opportunities, to share our life, to share our faith, and to share Jesus with people. Really So we do the alpha courses, we do these events like the light party, like Christmas events, and I guess it's for us just to be looking for those opportunities to invite people.
Yeah, I think of CAP as you're saying that as well. That kind of almost merging of the two, in the sense of, CAP, I know on a Christians Against Poverty visit, they'll go to somebody's house and do the whole debt thing of trying to help them through, show us the debts you've got, and they'll kind of talk about that. And then at the end, they'll always be like, can we pray? And they'll always offer that opportunity. And I know over the years, CAP have done a lot to kind of help go, right, we're going to try and put some events on, or encourage clients to come along to some free events at church and things like that. So actually, it means they can, say, for example, at Christmas, they might struggle to pay for sort of events to do with their kids at Christmas, but why not come to this church event that's completely free and it's accessible for them? And so it's got almost like trying to lean into both with them, eh?
Yeah. That's what we see, that it's often doing one leads to helping the other. So doing the justice, trying to help people with their physical needs, can often lead to those spiritual conversations, and sometimes vice versa.
Yeah. So in terms of like an individual who maybe is watching this, maybe they kind of are feeling challenged into, I don't know, proclaiming Jesus more to the people around them, or feeling challenged to lean into social justice more and what might the needs of my community be? Any advice in terms of what they can do?
I think, yeah, it's trying to hear from God and just trying to get a sense of what the Spirit is calling you to do, and it might be something big. You know, it might be starting a charity, it might be starting a ministry, and then praying about that, and then asking God to just show you the next step. It might be having conversations with people who've done similar ministries or charities in different churches or different areas in the country, and just gaining that wisdom and that understanding. So it could be the next step, or it might be that somebody's already doing something like what's on your heart, and it just getting behind them and being part of that. In terms of personal evangelism, I think it's always just being led by the Spirit. You know, even when I was working a secular job on the building sites and in a train depot, is, you know, you're working with like 50 other people, and the reality is not everyone is ready to hear the message of the gospel. But it's just like, okay, God, like, who are you leading me to, and being open to the Spirit, and just being obedient to where God's calling you, and who God's calling you towards to share your faith with.
Yeah, it's really good. It's like I said earlier, so that attention to manage, just keep pulling at that tension either way, and asking God to help you in it. It's really good. Cool, thank you. Well, we're sort of out of time. Cool. So thanks for your time. Really appreciate it, especially on your birthday as well, Leon. Have a good rest of the day.
I'm just waiting for the production team to bring me out a cake or something. But
I can't promise you that's happening.
With 21 candles on it.
Yeah, 21. Remember, put your guesses in of his age in the comments below. But anyway, we're going to
keep it down to 2 digits at least.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what the comments are going to say now. So thank you for your time. Thanks for watching today. Just a reminder, if you want to watch back Leon's message, you can watch it here on the Kerith YouTube channel, or head to wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can listen to the Kerith Windsor podcast and catch up there. And if you're on the Isle of Wight, then you can listen back to Ellie's message on this topic as well. But thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you soon for another conversation. Cheers.